Indeed, good evening, welcome. My name is Peter Wakaba, and this is going to be one of, news, views, analysis, insight into the budget reading that has taken place here today in Nairobi. Well, we have a really high-powered panel here in studio for you to do a deep dive into this very thing. Of course, looking at it from several different viewpoints, starting, of course, with the politics, the sentiment, and then looking at the numbers themselves. Is the government, is the treasury walking the talk or just selling us? Well, talk shop. I'll introduce my guests now. To start off on my near right, James Nyoro, former governor of Kiambu County, agriculture economist, and former boss at the Rockefeller Foundation. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
We also have here in studio, you've seen him here before, earlier today, public finance expert John Nyangi. He's just back from our radio stations, of course, where he's been deep diving the budget. Karibu sana.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, the MP for Kacheliba, Titus Lote, here to lend his insights into the political aspects of this. Of course, he is also an economist in profession, an economist at heart, and also has qualifications in public governance. We'll be getting right into it in a few minutes, but we first want to take a look at what the sentiment has been today, especially because following the budget reading today, there has been varied sentiment online, with people giving us various feedback to the polls that we set out today, and of course, giving us their thoughts on whether the government is actually living up to the promises that it has made. Our very own Raymond Muthee is standing by with that look, and of course joins us now. Raymond, what do you have for us?
A very busy day, actually. We were here in the morning trying to review what Kenyans were actually trying to mull over this budget and trying to see what exactly, which sectors will be benefiting and which ones will be losing. But there's been a flurry of feedback around the budget, and especially the thoughts on what the CS had to say. We had run a poll in the morning, actually, asking people, in the 2025-2026 budget, there's over 1 trillion being spent on loan and interest repayments alone. So we asked Kenyans, as a country, should we be borrowing less, tax more, tax less, borrow more, or any other alternative? And so there's a flurry of reactions. Like I said, Wangwa Makeri, 22, says we need a reset. This regime needs to go, reduce expenditure by reducing counties to 8 ASAP. Such an interesting review of what the CS had to say. Someone else here is saying 1.1 trillion to service debt is ridiculous. Like I'd read that feedback earlier. As John Mbadi said, they're using 1.3 trillion to service internal and external debts. How can a state recover from this? Borrowing more, taxing more, or introducing other alternatives to draw money from the already crashing economy? Kenya Expo says, people's eye say we should live within our means. Samuel Major says, why put funds in a basket with a hole? We can't fill a broken clay pot with water. We need to first solve the problem of misuse of public funds, and then we can talk about borrowing or taxing more. And then there's someone, K, who said, how about we manage what we have better? Wakaba, those are some of the feedback, some of the reactions that we got from Kenyans online with regards to the budget. But we had also put up a poll just to get the general reactions, just to know what Kenyans think about the budget that was actually read on the floor of Parliament. Now, the reactions on this one are quite different because the kind of feedback we're getting is actually tilted and inclined towards the protests that were happening in town, and that's, of course, in relation to the inquiry on the death of Albert Ojwang. And just to give you a rough idea, is that the budget was at 4.29 trillion. I know you'll canvass this with your team on the other side. The budget was at 4.29 trillion, of which 3.1 will be going to recurrent, and then the revenues will be standing at 3.32. I think we'll canvass that later, Wakaba. But generally, the feedback was inclined towards Albert Ojwang's inquiry. But it's interesting to see that Kenyans have very interesting proposals. I'm not sure if the Kenyans commenting here participated in the formation of this budget during the public participation phase. But generally, there's a feel that there's need to cut unnessential spending, reduce the debt, and spend what we have more, Wakaba.
Well, very interesting insights there from our social media, Raymond. Of course, the fact of the matter is with the numbers that were presented, there will be many, many different takes from many, many different people. I think we can then deep dive into the numbers and just sort of try and figure out what the high points were. And again, Raymond can take us through that, especially because the budget has grown slightly, even if government insists that it is not trying to tax us more, but is going to try and make the shilling go further by putting in place various measures. So, Raymond, what are the high points of this budget that was read out today?
Wakaba, like I had said earlier, the total budget has come to 4.29 trillion, beg your pardon, 4.29 trillion. The revenues stand at 3.32 trillion. And of course, the appropriations in aid is at 567 billion. The ordinary revenue, which consists of income tax, VAT, import duty, excess duty, and other taxes, stands at 2.75 trillion. Income tax is actually at 1.28 trillion. The VAT is 772 billion. Import duty is at 162 billion. Excise duty is at 335 billion. And other taxes at 202 billion. Now, this particular bit is interesting, and we have chosen, for this particular block of time, we have chosen to focus on the revenues, simply because the appropriations have been addressed a lot in Parliament, but the sticky issue remains the revenues, because that is where the finance bill comes in. And so, with those figures, the fiscal deficit, from my analysis, is what worries me the most, because it is at 923.2 billion shillings. Now, of this, 635 billion is local debt and 287 billion is foreign debt. And so, Wakaba, as you know, the principle of economics is that local debt might, at some point, stifle borrowing and affect interest rates. But that is quite a deficit, 923.2 billion. We are not so far from the 1 trillion shilling mark. And so that takes me to the total debt, which is 11.4 trillion, most of which is domestic, again, at 6.1 trillion, and the foreign is at 5.2 trillion. Interesting to note also as well, Wakaba, is that there's 7 new state departments that have a total allocation of, get this, 17.7 billion shillings. The State Department for National Government Coordination, for Science, Research and Innovation, Public Investments and Asset Management, State Department for Special Programs, the State Department for Aviation and Aerospace Development, the State Department for Children's Services, the State Department for Justice and Human Rights and Constitutional Affairs. Of course, CS John Buddy in Parliament had put up a very rosy speech. Some of the key issues that the government is targeting, of course, is the government's response is easing the tax burden. We had talked about that in throughout the coverage, enhancing liquidity and supporting small businesses as well, good governance on public finance. This was particularly key because it was appearing a lot in some of the feedback we were getting from financial experts and the Auditor General's report of the 2023-2024 spending. And then there's realistic budgeting, which he addressed as well, and improved public procurement. This is very sticky because we've had claims of tenders being inflated and particularly plunder, to say the least. And then, of course, among the pillars for the bottom-up economic transformation agenda was the agenda for the youth. And so the CS also addressed that and rolling out Climate Works, which is a national program to engage over 110,000 youth in paid work for community improvement, such as building roads, planting trees, and environmental cleanup. I'm looking at this as a Kazi Mtaani rebranding. And of course, some sectors have won, like education has won. Well, won in quotes because some sectors have actually lost, like basic education. But I know you'll be canvassing those issues with the rest of your panel. Mine is to just hand it back to you and see what kind of analysis we get of this budget. Let's get to hear what they thought would have been a better application for this, because there's a lot of feedback. I'll be sampling some more feedback from Facebook as well, because Facebook is where we get most of our feedback. But there's also a lot of engagement on X, Wakaba.
Well, indeed, Raymond, thank you very much for that deep insight. Of course, breaking it down for us, talking to us about the sticking points there, and of course, enabling us to start getting into that discussion. I want to go to my panel and now to get a first round of comments before we then look at a video of what the CS had to say about particular issues. And I want to start off at my far right with MP for Kacheliba, Titus Lote. You are seated in Parliament, so you listened to the budget speech. Do you think the government has been able to live up with its promises in the last budget to this point so far?
Thank you and good evening.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to the show to be able to dissect and give Kenyans the analysis of the budget. I know there are many other experts that are not seated here that are also giving their technical view about the budget.
Yes.
Overall, I will actually say the budget was good. The budget was good because last year, if you can remember, on the 25th, the Kenyans went to the street in June. And there were a lot of things, because in a budget, we are looking at both sides.
Yes.
The income part, which is actually financed with the finance bill, and the expenditure bit. And people had rejected completely the finance bill, because the finance bill had proposed a lot of raft of measures that were actually going into people's pockets, targeting things like bread, targeting things like airtime, internet. And so this year, you didn't see. And I think Kenyans have actually read this budget the way I'm saying. You didn't see demonstration. The demonstration that were out there today were something else, not about the budget. And overall, every year, we've actually seen that during the budget reading process, they are also sitting outside Parliament, the security is tightened.
Yes.
Because it is expected that at that point, Kenyans become agitated, because some of the things that they expect to have actually come into the budget did not come into the budget. And some of the measures of taxation are also included, which also affect them. So budget reading process is always a complicated matter. But today, I would say there was no demonstration because of the budget. The demonstration outside was something else, and I think it's been rightly said here. The budget was overall good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments. I want to throw to John Nyangi. Now, you've been sitting listening here most of the day with us, going through the various things bit by bit. What's your take on the budget?
Thanks, Peter, for having me here. First of all, I would like to comment that this is a critical budget moment in the budget calendar. And last year, when there was debate about the finance bill, we had demonstrations outside Parliament that were really bad. Today again, a very critical budget moment, we had protests and demonstrations in the city. Even though the honorable member here says it's a different story, but it is the same thing. It's about we're making the budget for what, for who? We're making this budget that we have a stable country, that we have the citizens being protected. We are having the security sector getting a largest share of the budget to ensure that you and me, when where we are, whether in the police cells, whether in the streets, whether in our farms, we are safe. But when this happens, that the same budget that we are approving here, discussing here, making highlights, setting appropriating funds for the security, that security is not guaranteed. You don't feel safe. Then this is also a very, very sad day that this one has to happen, and we are funding that particular institution. And when you look at this budget, there is how things are changing, the credibility of this. We're talking about 923 budget deficit. When this was submitted and was approved yesterday, it was 876. So just within a few hours, you can see how it is moving. The budget for health, like for example, critical and chronic illness fund, it was 10 billion. That one has come down to 8 billion. The borrowing has gone up to what? From 4.5% of GDP to 4.7. Then you can see clearly that the credibility of these numbers is not something that you can really depend on, because we have this very good pronunciations and promise and the highlights, but when it comes to walking the talk, they're two worlds apart. Even these pronouncements here, we can relate even with the budget that is coming to an end this month. And you see that when it was being passed, the highlights that were there, the promises that were there, and now with the implementation, two worlds apart. Very quick highlight. There was a 2.8 trillion target for revenue. Then what are we doing now?
13% less.
We are 1.8 trillion. We have 2 months to the end of the financial year. 10 months as of the end of April, 1.8. Even now, putting their 2.75 target
Yes.
For revenue, I can assure you that
Yes.
we'll be here. That money can never come out of this economy.
Yes. I'm happy that you alluded there, because there had been conversations yesterday about a supplementary budget that was going to pop up somewhere, and I suspect that that's the difference that we are talking about, despite the mechanisms. I want to throw it now to James Nyoro. You have experience in the space that when we talk about this money that we're talking about, when we miss targets, sometimes it is the counties that are suffering. But before we go there, overall, what's your take on the budget?
Thank you, Peter. I think, generally, you wouldn't have expected anything different.
Yes.
Characteristically, in this country, we have seen a trend where we don't even learn from our mistakes. Over the last couple of years, we have seen the deficit increasing. Whether you call it in terms that it is decreasing in terms of GDP,
yes.
it is realistically increasing. Now it's close to a trillion.
Yes.
It's 923 million. So I wouldn't have expected anything less.
Yes.
I think the most important thing to note is we as a country, we are in a pit. And instead of starting to think about coming out of that pit, we are digging deeper. In the sense that when you see that for every 100 shillings,
Yes.
63 shillings are going to pay debt. That in itself,
There is a problem.
okay, it is a big problem. Even before you start appropriating, because I think, Mheshimiwa, there is the difference between this appropriation and the finance bill. This was appropriation, and is the one that we are talking about.
Yes.
So you can't balance your figures. You over time,
Yes.
the deficit has actually been increasing.
Yes.
A budget has two sides, and Mheshimiwa has said it. It has a revenue side
Yes.
and an expenditure side.
Yes.
What we are seeing is revenues going to shrinking,
Yes.
expenditures going up. As a result of that, you have two things that happen.
Yes.
One is the budget deficit keeps on going up, and two, that requires for frequent
Borrowing.
supplementary budgets,
Yes.
okay, so that you can adjust it. You can be sure that this budget, there will be a supplementary budget before September,
Yes.
okay, to change some figures. So for me, I would not have expected anything less. I think this is something that we have to get used to. The problem really is when you come to sectoral allocation.
Yes.
Okay? Because if you cannot be able to reduce the overall expenditure, then what you do is probably put in money where you expect better returns. But then you don't see that. Look at the money put in agriculture, 47 billion.
Yes.
That is a sector that contributes about a third of our GDP.
Yes.
Look at the amount put in manufacturing, 18 billion.
Yes.
A country that is growing, you can say your GDP is growing, but if it is not being driven by manufacturing, not being driven by agriculture, it is being driven by services,
Yes.
it means it is growing, poverty is not reducing, employment is not increasing. So in other words, we have set a template in this country of doing budget, which we have followed without pausing and saying, can we learn from our mistakes in the previous year?
Yes.
So to me, I think we are already in a pit, and instead of walking out of the pit, we are digging deeper.
Thank you. And indeed, they're painting a really critically bad picture there. Of course, the fact that for many people who would expect the budget to put money in their pockets by creating jobs, by prioritizing areas which will have impact on the people at the bottom of the pyramid, that's certainly not happening. And of course, driving increasing inequality. Well, of course, when the CS set out his budget, there were specific things that he talked about. I want us to take a look at the first video now, essentially to set the stage for next bit of conversation, especially because there were promises made and want to see whether these were kept. Let's take a look at that.
There has been public perception and concerns in the past that our budgets tend to be unrealistic. To address these concerns, we took a two-pronged approach. First, we adopted the zero-based budgeting, where every budget item has to be justified at the beginning of every financial year. This process was used in the preparation of the financial year 2025-2026 budget, which is the first time it is used, and which budget I submitted to this House on the 30th of April 2025. Second, in response to concerns on unrealistic revenue projections, we have reduced revenue projection to be in line with the trends. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, revenue projections in the financial year 2025-26 budget and over the medium term are consistent with the growth of the economy.
And there you've had it yourself. The CS talking about the fact that in regards to unrealistic budgeting, unrealistic projections and expectations, the government has proposed to put in place several measures, including the zero-based approach when it comes to budgeting. Is that really happening, Mheshimiwa? Because when you think about it, when you look at what's on the table today, what he read, it would actually seem that in some places, because zero-based means that you have to justify the need. You start from a zero allocation and show why you need this money. When you look at some of the allocations and whether they're really important, is that really the case?
Well, I think what Waziri was trying to do,
yes.
First of all, the basis why some of those measures were taken, and especially the second measure,
yes,
where we're looking at the trends of our economic development.
Yes.
We saw in the year 23-24, the economic development was projected to have grown by 5.7. But then last year, it was projected to have actually grown by 4.7. It basically means it was coming down. And there were attributes. People attributed that probably to the third quarter. We've got the demonstration which closed the economy for around 3 months.
Yes.
It basically means that the trends were showing to the negative, that we cannot continue asking for money from people. And so we have to reduce our expectation from our public.
Yes.
And I think what Waziri has done, that was one, looking at the trends. If that was it, then it's good. But I think there was also the political bit of, are we able to stir back the anger that we had last year?
Yes.
And so those two played a role in terms of us reducing our revenue projection. And I think if we start becoming real like that as a country, and then we will actually grow. Because every single year, since when I started knowing about budget reading, we've always been putting our budgets way above. We're putting our revenue projections way above our abilities.
Yes.
And I think Waziri has done a little bit, because I expected this year, if it wasn't because of the revenue projection, the growth,
yes,
or the last year demonstration, probably this year we expected to have actually seen another higher projection. What I would recommend, and I think Waziri talked about that, and I think every Kenyan, for all the public hearings that we've gone, talked about, is our expenditure. That is where the problem is. It is not our revenue. We can be able to raise. If we can, when I saw our budget was $1 trillion one time,
yes,
I was shocked that we could be able to raise that. Yes. But now we're talking about 4.2 trillion,
yes,
and yet we can say we're able to raise some bit of that. It basically means we've got the capacity to raise.
Yes.
What we need to do is to ask government,
yes,
to ask government to reduce expenditure. And I think this discussion has always been there. And that is where reality actually hit us hard.
Yes.
That in some offices, and I remember during Uhuru's time, tea alone costs billions of shillings, billions.
Yes.
Tea. Why do we need tea in a country where we are borrowing,
yes,
even to put that tea on the table? So for me, I would say it is good to go that direction of Waziri, where we start from the two-pronged approach that he has started.
Yes.
One, to look at our trends, and we do that, and we also do the zero-based budgeting. What he has said is a reality in this country, and I think it's not just because of this government. Supplementary budgets,
yes,
always waters down the meaning of budget reading. Why do we read a budget, and 3 months down the line, we are adjusting everything? Another 3 months, we are adjusting everything. So by the end of the year,
yes,
the original budget is lost meaning completely. Completely.
Yes.
And I think that is where the problem is.
I want to interject and ask, of course, you gentlemen to keep the replies shorter, because we have about maybe 30 more minutes to go and we have much ground to cover. John, one of the things that Mheshimiwa has specifically talked about, expenditure. There are spaces, there are things which people have not had conversations about. We've seen, for example, the increase that Raymond has talked about in state departments. This will mean increased people under the PSC working in those places. We've seen a call to reduce wages, expenditure in wages and those sorts of things. Have there been any specific measures that you've seen that would point to government actually walking the talk in this space?
When we are in the hole, we don't continue digging.
Yes.
And one way would be, how do we even reduce the size of government? But we are in the broad-based government, which means we have broadened the government.
To accommodate
we have created more government state departments.
Yes.
We've seen new appointments at high level of PSS,
Yes.
which creation of just one additional PS office, you know, what that comes with the cost of running that office.
Yes.
I had mentioned this in the morning, that Kenyan problem is an expenditure problem.
Yes.
It's not a revenue problem. If we are able to deal with our expenditure and directing the resources we have to the areas that have very high impact, then we would be able to generate more revenue and continually address our expenditure. But even Mheshimiwa has mentioned here about managing our revenue, being realistic.
Yes.
That we haven't given high estimation. But look at the expenditure. Expenditure has already gone higher, the projection. You know, in the current financial year, the revenue was 2.8 initially. And then it came to 2.4. So now we are at 2.75, even below what we had in the financial year that is just about to end. So how do we even project higher when we have not even able to meet 80% of our projection? You see, we have 1.8.
Yes.
How do we expect that we can move from 1.8 to 2.75? And then you look at our economy, where jobs are.
Yes.
The jobs are in the informal sector. Our economy is heavily in the informal sector, very small in the formal sector.
Yes.
The informal sector is largely outside government system. So instead of addressing the measures that the government would use even to broaden the revenue a bit, is to try formalize and also address the high cost of government. But will politics allow that to reform the public service?
So I want us to spend the next 20 minutes because, I mean, a lot of people have been talking about the challenges within the budget. Dr. Nyoro for a long time has been an expert in providing solutions. So I want us to try and look at that over the next 20 minutes, especially from a point of view where we now have this thing. The budget has been read. Kenyans know officially what the load is. They know that this is the starting point. They know that this is where we are going. Can we walk that talk? I want us to watch a video and then come back so that it then sort of sets the stage for the next round of this discussion. Let's take it away.
Next, I want to speak to restraining growth of public sector wage bill, which has been of serious concern. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to implement measures aimed at reducing the ratio of the government wage bill as a share of tax revenue, with a view to free much-needed resources for priority social and development spending. The government will implement the following initiatives to control the wage bill. First, the government will fully implement the unified human resource management system across all public sector entities by July 2025. This initiative is part of broader efforts to enhance public sector efficiency, improve management of wage bill, and ensure the effective utilization of public funds.
So the CS is saying all the right things. How do we as a country, how do we as stakeholders work to ensure that he's actually empowered to do what he's saying? For example, you've talked about agriculture. We know that this thing could be much better, much more impactful if we focused on the right things like extension services, giving people the right fertilizer, creating a myriad of different things. How should we then go about putting in place these things? Because we have to expect that either if they haven't been doing it, it's either lack of political will or simple lack of knowledge, and I don't think it's either.
You know, Peter, if you listen to the policy statement,
Yes.
from Waziri John Badi, it makes all the economic sense in the world.
Yes.
The policy statement, including the wage bill,
Yes.
I don't know what is the percentage of wage bill to the total expenditure.
Yes.
So if you rationalize it, you know, how much do you save from that? But if you reason to what he was talking about, including, changing some of the parastatals, merging them, removing the ones that are, of waste, going in to think about, let us bring in the private sector so that the private sector can help us in investment, talking about PPP and how PPP should come in. And, it does not necessarily mean that the government should do it. Somebody can do it if you are providing the conducive environment. There are several clear measures. What he did not talk about, which I expected he would talk about in terms of the reduction of the expenditure, is the wastage. The wastage that, as a country, we have experienced. Mheshimiwa was talking about tea may not be a problem. Just go. The other day, somebody was telling me that they had gone for a meeting in Turkey, and the facilitator was Kenyan, and half of the room was full of Kenyans. Now, the amount of money that we spent, we would have spent it here at Kenya School of Government. Wastages in terms of office renovations, building renovations, and so on and so forth. So there are good means, and out of that total expenditure that we saw, if we really want to follow the policy statement that Waziri talked about, we'll be able to bring down the expenditure that we are talking about. And that is one. The second thing that we need to do, and I'm happy about zero-based budgeting, because zero-based budgeting says, do we need it? Tell me, first of all, where is our priority sectors? Okay? Our priority sectors should be those sectors that we are sure they will bring in, create more jobs, enhance food security, they will create incomes, and so on. So if you are doing zero-based budget, I would have wanted to see more in terms of agriculture. Okay? Because agriculture is an investment. Every shilling that you put in, you probably get 1 shilling 20 cents. Sorry, and I'm not attacking health. Health is a consumer. You put in a shilling, it is consumed in form of a drug. So we need to look at those sectors that are productive, that are going to enhance our growth. And like I said, if you leave out manufacturing, industry and manufacturing, and you leave out water, irrigation, and you leave out agriculture, you come in and give money to defense, because there has been, in fact, money that came from basic education. Some of it went to defense. Is that really our priority? People have been questioning the whole aspect about housing, because what housing has done is that it has moved to be the priority sector that the government is looking at. And really, the question at this moment in time is it? And people also are talking about it has reduced my disposable income. So even if you are to tax me, you can't tax me below that level. So what we need, and it's good you have brought in this, as a country, including the opposition, they need now to stop moving all over the country, come in and provide an alternative strategy. What we need are alternative strategies so that we can say this budget deficit, it's not more than 200. Minimum borrowing from the domestic market so that resources are available to the private sector. Put more money in agriculture. Okay, my last comment. Look at the money that has been put into county governments. Okay, 467 billion. How much of that money is going to be put into productive sectors? There is, okay, the government may have put 1.1% of the overall budget to agriculture. The counties, we don't have any idea. They may put 0, they may put 1, they may put 4, they may put whatever. No coordination at all between what the county governments are doing and what the national government are doing. So we need really to get into that space and soberize and start talking about what we need to do in order to move out of the hole that I was talking about.
Really insightful thoughts there. I want to go to Mheshimiwa. You had the statement. You've seen that he's actually saying the right things. If it was up to you to drive the implementation, and indeed in some ways it is, what do you think will be the priorities? What are the things that you will do to make sure that we start to actually actualize what we've set out today?
Well, I think first of all, he's doing something.
Yes.
If you look at what my brother has just said here, is that most of our employer now is the informal sector. That's where most of the Kenyans get their bread. And from the budget, I looked at it, as much as people are complaining about education getting a cut, especially on the basic education, I saw some increment on the TVET and the TTIs. These are institutions that are actually training people to actually become better in the informal sector. And you can find that this informal sector is also employing Kenyans outside this country. And you look at the budget, some part of the budget increment is because of the people who are emitting, because Kenyans have gone out. With the informal sector, now people do not employ people with tie from outside. You have to go with, you have to know how to drive a machine. You have to know how to put mortar and brick together, and they get jobs. So for me, I thought this increment at 7 billion for TVET and TTI was also a way forward of increasing revenues so that those revenues can come and improve this country. However, employment is something that has become an issue here because the CS has found himself between a hard place and a rock. When Kenyans are saying, employ us, give us employment. And at the same time, the economy cannot employ. And the reason why we've actually gone back to the youth empowerment, where we want to employ something like Kazi Mtaani. Seriously, that is not going to change the economy. But the thing is, it's going to placate Kenyans that at least the youth have something they are doing. But for me, I'll say that is where politics now interferes with our budget. And the reason why we even find highly politics now, that has also interfered with our budget. Because if you look at some of the way the budgets are also being set now, some sectors that did not require probably resources are now getting resources because there is heightened tension, and so the security is supposed to be increased because you can already see, and I want to differ with my brother, the demonstration outside today did not do anything. In fact, the people spoke. They say justice for Ojwang. They did not say anything to do with our budget. And so you see that the amount of money you've expended even today to put the security men on the streets as also as a narrative to this budget. So for me, I'll say, if we can tension down our politics, because we've actually now been in serious political campaigns on both sides.
But isn't it about resources?
It is about resources, but then they drive each other. If we decide to say, okay, let us not do the campaigns, then we can be able to manage our resources better. But if we do these campaigns, the people who are managing resources will also try to have some of the aspects. So for me, I'll say, politics is also interfering with our budgets. And the way we manage our budgets are also interfered by the way we have set ourselves regionally. Because I'm so sad to see that we are starting to drive our politics into regions. That is so sad. And that is basically, if you look at our budgets, yesterday in Parliament, we were arguing that some bit of the budget is going to one region, and it was palpable in Parliament. People were hungry.
I want to come to John, and essentially, what Mheshimiwa is talking about is the politics of inequality, the budgets of inequality. The fact that the politics is actually driving allocation of resources, rather than the rationalization, the prioritization that James Nyoro is talking about. If we are to try and actualize the ideals that the CS has set out today, even as we look forward, how do we protect the ideals that he set out? Essentially, because it's not up to us as Kenyans, because if this thing does not work, who knows where this will go?
It's very important that we grow the cake. When we grow the cake, in a manner that the whole nation can be able to share that cake. When you look at the wage bill, it's taking a large share. And then when you're talking about managing the wage bill, slightly or closely to what Mheshimiwa is talking about, how politics is interfering with that. We know that even the constraint and the hindrance to reform and have a manageable wage bill has been the lack of political goodwill. That we have analysis, we have audits that are showing that we need to remove ghost workers from our payroll. We need to pay our workers from the payroll. We need to rationalize our wages. We have public servants who permanently stay in Naivasha. That's where they come in, they're working from. We need to address, but they tell you that if you remove that, then things are not going, the center can never hold. So can the politics, and Mheshimiwa here comes from the political house, where all these things.
The hard things can be said.
Where they can they can give the president the support that he needs, and then he can crack the whip. But does he have the guts to crack that whip?
Okay. I want you to talk about the challenges that agriculture has been facing, that manufacturing has been facing, especially because we know that in the budget policy statement, there were things that the Treasury tried to set out that manufacturers, that industrialists in the agriculture space have requested, but year in, year out, we see these challenges remain. For example, non-tariff barriers. We keep talking about trading across borders for the AFCFTA, but when you look at the competitiveness of Kenyan goods because of things like cost of power, the inefficiencies in the space, the cess, the stopped by police roadblocks, the various challenges that are put in the way of investors in this country, how do we start to handle them from what was set out today?
Okay, before I come to that, Peter, let me just contribute about the political economy, which is what we are calling politics. It will be very, very, very difficult for any economy, including the US, to divorce politics from the economy. But what normally happens is that, and there was some time like that in this country, I think it must have been during Kibaki time, where the economy was ignoring the political noise. Irrespective of what the political environment was, you remember there was the whole argument about Nusumukate, the disagreements between Baba and Kibaki and all of that. But our economy was ignoring. It continued to grow. But it will be very, very difficult for where we are now to divorce politics from the economy. What we need to do is probably to minimize and not touch on the areas that will be so sensitive. Do you know that, Mheshimiwa, this is probably the last rational budget through this tenure, because next year, June, the budget will be about election. There will be money there.
We'll be in the election cycle.
For ballot papers. There will be money there. So this is kind of, this fourth year of the Kenya Kwanza government is probably the last year that you can comfortably talk about, development and whatever. So the question will really be, despite that, can we have less noise, political noise, interfering with the economic development, with the vibrancy of the private sector, because we have a very vibrant private sector. But back to your question, our neighbors, particularly on food, they are positioning to feed us. I've had the benefit of, visiting some parts of Tanzania, all the way from Songea, all the way up to Karagwe up there. They have been having this program, which they call Kilimo Kwanza, and the target is to produce excess food because they know we are the market. Whether you are talking about basic food, whether you are talking about animal feeds, whether you are talking about onions, potatoes are coming from Rwanda. If you go to Uganda, the northern part, the northwestern part, Guru, from Mbale to Guru, all the way to Soroti, up to Nimule at the border, they are positioning themselves to feed us, including feeding us with eggs, feeding us, they are positioning to feed us. So what we should do is also position ourselves to sell to them what what our comparative advantage is.
Yes.
And I'm happy to start to see, coffee is expanding to us in Gishu and Trans Nzoia, avocados are coming in,
Yes.
and so on. But a lot of those are driven by the private sector.
Yes.
And we have to be very clear because there's a correlation between the performance of certain value chains or commodities
Yes.
and government interference. We used to say that where government has too much interest,
Yes.
those enterprises actually perform very poorly.
worse.
We know horticulture has been performing very well. Government is very limited in it.
Yes.
Dairy, government has been, performing. It has been performing very well. Government is not in it.
Yes.
You enter coffee, government in it. It was not performing
The
well.
chaos with the
You
reforms.
enter into maize.
Yes.
Everybody, is
and now tea.
And now they have entered into tea. So. It's not that government should be directing the performance of these sectors. In fact, the more the government ignores some of these and just provide the conducive environment, the more it moves. So for me, I think the unfortunate one is industry and manufacturing. Because if we don't do anything, we are not only talking about neighbors.
Yes.
We are now talking about other countries in Asia, making use of including toothpick,
Yes.
that they can, the toothpick will be made from Korea. So when you see the manufacturing contribution to the GDP decreasing, when you see the growth rate of manufacturing going down,
Yes.
you get worried. And the question really would be,
Yes.
what do we do as a country to harness what
Yes.
we are good at?
Okay. We have just about 5 minutes, and I want to take one round of comments before we wind up. I think I want to start with John. Essentially, you seem to have a burning comeback to this issue, but in closing.
Yes. The economy will give us what we give it.
Yes.
Peter, if you see that we are going to borrow 923 billion
Yes.
and spend in development 708,
Yes.
which is less than what we are going to invest. And even from the trend,
Yes.
with the challenges in cash flow, we're going to have less spending on development. When we have any delays in cash flow, challenges, budget rationalization, always we have seen the development budget is the one that takes the cut.
Yes.
So how are we going to create these jobs? How are we going to spur this economic growth if we are not investing all the amount that we have borrowed? So we are supposed to have significant amount in investment. And if we cannot invest substantial amount in the economy, then at least all the money that we have borrowed
Yes.
should be channeled into investment so that it's able to expand the economy.
Okay,
But
tighten the belt and put the money towards investment. Mheshimiwa, in closing, 1 minute.
In closing, I think one of the things that I'm happy about is that as much as we are borrowing 860 billion, we are repaying 1.3 trillion.
So
it
it's
basically
rolling over.
means
Yes.
it basically means that we are reducing our borrowing because we are not borrowing the same. There's a difference of around 430 billion.
Yes.
So if we can continue
In
this
interest
trend,
or principal?
pardon?
But we're just paying interest. Mostly
Yeah, we are paying. I know we are paying interest.
Yes.
But we are not borrowing to levels where it goes up. It's somehow we have accepted, and that's why we find that
Mheshimiwa, borrowing
our
has
deficit,
actually
our fiscal
In fact,
deficit,
exponential.
our fiscal deficit
I have the
to
figures.
GDP
Yes.
is actually come down from 9% to 5.7%. Now we're talking about 3-point-something%. It basically means we are reducing the kind of deficit that we've always had. And so for me,
the only
as
good
much as
thing
it
for
is
me,
hard,
Mheshimiwa, in the debt situation is the fact that we've been able to get longer tenure and roll it over. But in reality, it's actually expanding and expanding
it
in
will
a way.
definitely expand because
It's why we have to keep changing the ceiling and also the GDP figure because they keep moving it so that it looks rosy. But
it is true. I do agree with you. But why we are doing that is because the situation in the ground dictates that we do that. One,
Yes.
our birth rate, surprisingly, somebody was telling me that our birth rate during colonial times was 10%, and so we were doing better. Our birth rate is actually high.
Yes.
And so it basically means that our per capita income is reduced by the activity, the human activity of us producing more people who we cannot produce for on the economy side. And so for me, I'll say our African culture,
Yes.
our societal culture has not allowed us to start enjoying the benefits of our economic growth because we produce more people, more mouths,
Yes.
more demands to our economy. And so we are forced to borrow to be able to meet this.
Well,
So if we want to support the government,
yes.
if we want to support the government, let us reduce the multiplication of people.
Birth rate. No. That is actually across the world, Mweshimi. I know it is your idea, but across the world, people are struggling to grow.
It was
their
done
birth
in China. When China was poor, they actually came to a one-child policy. Now is when they want to increase because they were able now to put money together
I'll have to
and
cut
the
you
economy.
off because we have to take his comments. But in reality, when you look at the budget and the increase that we've had, because of inflation, I actually foresee that we will have to do a supplementary just to cover that. But please.
I think first of all, my comment on this is that the only good thing about our debt is that we have not defaulted.
Yes.
There is nothing else
Yes.
good about the debt. The debt is bad, it's big, it's borrowing from the domestic market, it's crowding the private sector. The only good thing is we have not defaulted. You know, along the way, the CS talked about some of the challenges that this budget is going to face and the country is going to face.
Yes.
And he was very, very, very clear about climate change. He was very, very clear about geopolitical issues that are going on in Gaza and wherever.
Yes.
He was very, very, very clear about the tariffs, the tariff wars from America affecting us.
Yes.
I want to add to him another one. We need to have a peaceful Kenya.
Definitely.
We need to stop the kind of things that we saw today.
Yes.
The challenge of continuing to antagonize the Gen Zs or antagonize the population and wherever our effort goes there. So even as Waziri thinks about geopolitical, climate change and whatever, let him think about internally. What is this that we are going to do as a country to remain united, to have all our effort towards economic growth and nothing of the kind of thing that we saw on the streets today.
Okay. Indeed, gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time. Of course, just when the discussion is beginning to warm up and heat up. But I think I'll invite you back here next week, all of you, so that we can continue this conversation essentially and try to crack this nut. But for now, unfortunately, we are out of time. Just to recap quickly, we've talked about the unrealistic aspects of the budget. And of course, Mheshimiwa is setting us there straight. But asanteni sana. Of course, Titus Lutaya MP for Kacheliba, James Nyoro, former governor of Kiambu County, and John Nyange, public finance management expert. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. And of course, from us here in studio, it is Kwaheri ya Kunana. But of course, the news continues in just a few minutes with Jesse Rogers. From us, it is until next time. Bye.